Yep. Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. Yeah. Oh, you were sharing. Can you get stuff?
Did it stop?
Yeah.
Yes. Technology, it's difficult, right?
I will. Once we get the screen sharing going, it'll kick off. Okay, everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming out today. This is a Systems Engineering Friday talk that's co-led by the INCOSE, the International Council on Systems Engineering student division that we've got here, the INCOSE RAMS. So our presenters today are from the INCOSE RAMS leadership, and we've broadened our Friday talk to include more than just the department members, but also anyone as part of INCOSE, and I think anyone working in the powerhouse today. So thank you for many of our extra guests and joining us both in person and virtually today. Our talk is going to be a bit on enterprise security automation and also some open source sharing and Project Telescope. So we've got first, we'll kick off with a brief overview of what is INCOSE and the student chapter here and what's our focus. For those of you who aren't familiar, who might want to get involved. So INCOSE itself, International Council on Systems Engineering, one of the largest professional societies for systems engineers, particularly in the US, but even worldwide. The mission being to address the complex societal and technical challenges by enabling, promoting, and advancing systems engineering and systems approaches. Slide, please. Some of you may be familiar with INCOSE as a part of the certification process. If you've taken the Introduction to Systems course, you may have applied and received your certification as a ASIP. Some of you with experience may have CSIP, like myself, or those towards the end, or with a lot of experience in their career, maybe ESIPs as well. That is a function that INCOSE serves in the professional community as well as certification. If that's something you're interested in, they can certainly provide you an avenue to distinguish yourself with those type of things. Slide. Also wanted to point out the systems engineering body of knowledge. So this is a living document, kind of well, it is a Wikipedia page for systems engineering that the community can update and share useful, relevant information for the community. And the community encourages participation in sharing and updating of that. But a resource that you may want to check out if you're looking for relevant info on a given systems engineering topic. Slide. So what's the INCOSE RAM student division? We won't belabor this in detail, but if you look at the general structure, INCOSE being an international organization, and then they are organized into chapters across the United States. So we are a part of the Rocky Mountain region chapter of INCOSE. And within these professional chapters, they also have the opportunity to have some student divisions. We are, I think, the first student division in the Rocky Mountain region. Yeah. Is that correct? We're kind of proud of that here at CSU, having the first student division for INCOSE. So we are not only recognized by INCOSE, but also by the university as a part of the SLICE program as well. And well supported by the department. Slide. Thanks for pizza today for those in person. Thank the department. What's our mission? The mission of INCOSE RAMS is to advance systems engineering in academia, industry, and government while promoting research for it and solutions that meet societal needs. What's our value proposition? Why be a part of INCOSE RAMS? Well, we said that we're going to provide some recurring meetings. We're going to provide a resource, a central resource and communication forum, which we have in the Microsoft Teams site. You can ask questions, view the recordings of the meetings we do have, look at other resources that you may find helpful, see some reminders about upcoming events. And then we also promote mentorship or networking events, both formally with things like happy hour socials with professionals intermingling with the students, and also informally, if you reach out and ask for a mentor, someone will help you find one that's appropriate for what you're looking to learn about. And then assistance with participation in INCOSE events, both from the chapter and the department. Slide. Okay, these are your leadership for the INCOSE RAMS. So really, who do you reach out to if you want to get more involved or have a question? Hopefully, we'll be having a social in May or a co-sponsored social that those in person could attend. Okay, and then upcoming events I wanted to point out, particularly if you're interested in the Western States Regional Conference, the deadline to submit abstracts is 1 May for both presentations and student posters. So there are opportunities to submit a paper, to do a presentation, or to just do a poster. So I encourage you to participate in that. And then the International Symposium is this summer in Hawaii, but the submissions for that are already closed, but I hope to see some of you there. Hopefully we've got a lot of folks with accepted works. And last plug is we'd love more volunteers to present at these sessions or participate and help make this community better. So with that, I'll turn it over for the meat of the presentation to Kenny Peoples. He's working with Red Hat and a doctoral of engineering student here in this program, and he's got some really cool content to lead us through today with a couple other collaborators. So go ahead, Kenny, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome. So Robert, if you will, let me know if I start going over 10 minutes. I want to make sure that we get the Project Telescope, and thanks to you and Andy joining us, the Red Hat Project Telescope team. So let's go ahead and hop into what is open source. I'd like to see if you can, a show of hands real quick. Who knows what open source is? Raise some hands. Okay. And who is using or contributing to an open source project currently? Raise the hands. Anybody contributing to open source at the moment?
I think everybody's a user.
Yeah.
So open source is a great way to, for those of you that are doing your PhD and doctorate like myself, open source projects are a good way to get feedback on your practicum and dissertation. The one that I'm doing myself is Kestrel as a Service with the Open Cybersecurity Alliance. And so getting your information out in GitLab, GitHub, sharing what you're doing, open source is a great way to do that. And so today we're going to be going through a little bit of open source, highlight what it is, and then jump into Telescope and dive into what Telescope is, how you can get involved, and show that as an example of community involvement with an idea or concept. So let's keep going. So there's a couple of points I want to make here. I've had some people ask, well, what is open source and an open source project? And within the slide deck, I like what someone used as an example. And this analogy is around baking some cookies. So while you're eating lunch, this is a good example too. So if you enjoy eating cookies, you can keep going to the chef or the person cooking and to provide you with more cookies or ask for the recipe and make it yourself at home. If I give you that recipe, or the person baking gives you that recipe, not only can you view all the ingredients and how it's baked, but you can change that recipe. And so if you think that there's a way to make it better, such as it's too sweet or got too much sugar in it, you can reduce the amount used for the recipe or change it. Or if you prefer milk chocolate over dark chocolate, so forth, you can substitute that. And so after you change that recipe, then you can make your own version of the cookie. And now it's different than the original, but you can share that back to the community and make the community have that option and decide whether it goes into that original recipe or not. So even though I use that analogy, you can look at open source software as taking the code, enhancing it, improving it, making it better, and then sharing it back with the community. And most open source projects, and it's not the only method, but most are out in GitHub, GitLab, some repository that can be shared, have certain guidelines, and have an easy way to improve it. So I'm going to start speeding up because I want to make sure we have time. Any slides I don't go over will be in the deck, and feel free to reach out to one of us if you have questions, but some of the slides will be read ahead. So I am a cybersecurity architect at Red Hat, and of course, Red Hat, their initial product was Linux, right? So they had an upstream community for the Linux kernel, and then Red Hat starting building the enterprise edition. And so that's what Red Hat provides, is the open source technology for different levels of the enterprise. And it doesn't mean you have to have the enterprise edition. You can use the open source edition, but we'll talk about the benefits there. But Red Hat is considered an enterprise open source expert, or I like to think so. And so when we look at what does it mean to have a community project, how do we take that community project, move it to an enterprise product? What does that mean from project to product? And so this chart gives you an idea. A project may have the emphasis on experimentation, new features, where an enterprise product, which means commercial support, there's an emphasis on stability and security. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't an emphasis on security and community, but with the enterprise edition, you're going to have more QA. It's going to go through an additional rigor for release. Of course, with the open source project or community version, you're going to have new features and updates added more rapidly. And with the enterprise, it's according to a predictable cadence or schedule. And so with the open source project, that is dependent on community volunteers. And so if you're working on your PhD or doctorate and you decide to put it out as a community project, my hope for myself as well as for you is that you're able to get some community input to make your dissertation or practicum better. So when you do your preliminary exam or you do your dissertation in front of the committee, it's already had plenty of input. And so definitely it is good to get the community volunteers. And of course, with a enterprise version, you're going to have service level agreement that's used for support. For the project, you also have limited documentation, but with an enterprise version, you're going to have more thorough documentation and training available. So I've enjoyed seeing how Red Hat takes a global community on some of these projects and turn them into an enterprise product. And so when we look at this graphic and look at something like Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux, I would challenge folks to look at all the different businesses and tech companies, and we'll get to another slide, but I would challenge you to find a company or a group that is not using open source technology. Red Hat Enterprise Linux is used pretty much everywhere, and not just Red Hat, but we're talking other Linux vendors as well. So I wanted to share some of these survey findings that Red Hat did, and it was more than just Red Hat customers, even though Red Hat was the sponsor. But going through these surveys, this says 80% of the leaders expect to increase their use of enterprise open source software for emerging technologies. Using open source software, it's an easy way to take a concept for an emerging technology and rapidly get it to market. And that's just not external, but also for internal IT. So of those that were surveyed, there is a top 4 of uses, which are infrastructure modernization, digital transformation, application development, and modernization. But what are the advantages to enterprise open source? There's some more slides below that will go into detail. So if I run out of time, you'll be able to refer back to these. But these top 5, flexibility for customized solutions. So a lot of times when I'm building something, some software, I can go out to GitHub or GitLab. I can grab some code that somebody's used and that they want to share. I can either fork it and contribute it back, or I can use it and make sure to give that person or group credit. But it's easy to take what's being built in another project and use it as well, and to customize it. And for an organization, it's access to latest innovations. So you can definitely see what's going on in different industries, whether it's healthcare, space, DoD. A lot of these projects are shared out there. And when we talk hybrid cloud, that means we're using a private cloud, or could be using a private cloud and a public cloud. So maybe mixing something like OpenStack or OpenShift locally, and combining that with AWS or Azure, Google Cloud, so forth. And so that also goes to simplifying that process of adopting a hybrid cloud infrastructure, as well as being key to security strategy. So something that if you use open source, you're not going to have the security that you could if you have proprietary software. And I think it's the opposite. You can get more testing, you can find vulnerabilities quicker when you're using open source software. And so what I wanted to note on here with questions to consider, how much open source software you're using, or the company that you work for, how much are they using, and how is that open source software, how is it being managed and audited. And so with our PhD and doctorate programs that we work in, I like to reference one in particular that a PhD student used, and that's Security Onion. It's actually based in Augusta near the Georgia Cyber Center and Fort Gordon. And a PhD student started Security Onion, which are defensive cybersecurity projects. And he's taken that from his idea or his concept, which is out in, I believe it is on GitHub, not GitLab, but GitHub. But he took his idea as a PhD student, he put it out there, he got contributors, and now he has a company, he's CEO, and he is selling training on those different projects in Security Union to the government and to the commercial sector as well. So open source is great for us as students. How am I doing on time, Robert?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I mean, I think you're good. We can keep moving.
All right, thank you. I'll probably do a couple of more minutes and then we'll jump over to Project Telescope. So I want to go ahead and excuse me for jumping through, but there were a lot of slides in here. This slide I liked a lot because you're not just building a software stack when you're going in and building open source software and sharing it. You're being able to move fast and innovate and get your peers to review the material that you're doing. And so this quote from Greg Sattel, I like a lot. So we don't want to do the old notions of building proprietary binaries that we're going to share out. We want to share out open source code as well. So I like this slide a lot as well in that if you look on the far left, Red Hat is one of the companies that contribute to open source the most. But if you look beside there, then we go to Google, IBM, Microsoft, Facebook, AWS, VMware, so forth on down the line. I think this was 2019, 2020. But now that we're in 2023, I know that this list has grown and the adoption numbers are a lot higher. This is a significant change in when I started out in software where a lot of it was proprietary. Now the source code is more open. The data may be important more than the code, and that kept more closer to a company than the actual source itself. So some of the benefits I mentioned, and like I said, you can go back and review these slides. I'm going to finish with the benefits and the challenges, and then we'll go into Project Telescope. So some of the benefits with open source technology, if you look at some of these, I'm going to just go through a couple. So we have peer review that I mentioned. So it's really nice to be able to put something out on GitHub, GitLab, and have someone come back and say, well, did you think of this? Or I see an error, or here's another piece of technology that you can should use. So when that open source community is active and people are continually in there with that domain knowledge as well as software knowledge, that peer review can really make a difference for adoption. And transparency, what's nice is the code being out and available, people know what you're doing, and there is a transparency of how code is getting changed. And so that's really nice. Now, some people ask, well, what if my algorithm, I don't want it to be transparent. And if we look at some of the credit score companies, they want to keep their algorithms under lock and key. I still think that open source is the better route, even if you share an algorithm, because you can improve it and make it better. It just may be some of the data that you don't want to get out. And so in the credit company example, you certainly wouldn't want those companies to release personal information, but it sure would be nice to know exactly how that score is being generated. And then reliability. I think that also goes to security as well, not just reliability and security. Proprietary code, a lot of times that's relying on a single author or company. Well, with open source and the many different authors, and of course that still means there's some processes for code getting committed and accepted, but it makes the code better and quicker, more reliable, and being able to find issues quickly and resolve them quickly. Flexibility, you're not locked in to using code a specific way. Like I say, when it's peer reviewed, you can make decisions as a community on what has to change. So it's very flexible. And then with your lower cost, it's not, I wouldn't say open source is free unless you're using code that's not commercially supported. You know, Red Hat is still paying people to do the support. So when you have that support, security hardening, additional security hardening, so forth, it is going to cost money somewhere. And so I'm going to go on to finish my section up on open source with some challenges. So there's still challenges. Open source is not perfect. I would say that it's still a better way to produce software and share your ideas and to innovate. But some of the challenges are intellectual property questions. The credit companies is one that I can think of where maybe they don't want to share their algorithm, but I still say that, you know, they should. Or, you know, some of the DoD space initiatives, a lot of times it's about the data and not necessarily about the source, but of course that depends. And this perception of security vulnerabilities and risk, that is a challenge, but it's still a better way to resolve security issues. Sometimes there is issues of buy-in from senior leadership or those that make a direct impact to cost or money. Lack of community participation, to me, that's probably the biggest. So if you have an open source community, if you're not getting a high level of community participation, at times that can impact you. It doesn't mean the stoppage of a project, but it can impact schedule and getting out innovation, so forth. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop at this point, and there's a couple other slides that you can go back through. Open Organization from Jim Whitehurst. If you want to really dive into open source culture and technology, that is a really good book to read, as well as going over to the Open Practice Library. So that has activities and processes for turning software development into open source and looking at best practices that others have submitted. So in summary, oops, won't go through each of these, but certainly go and look at them. Let's spend the rest of the time hopping into an example open source project and looking at Telescope. And we have several folks. I was trying to look online and see who has joined us. But since I've been talking for a bit, I'm going to turn it over to Robert, the founder of Project Telescope, and let him kick us off. And then we'll go through some slides and some others have joined us from the Project Telescope team. So Robert, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to kick us off, and we'll go through Project Telescope.
Awesome. Thanks, Kenny. First of all, can everyone hear me just fine?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very cool. So, hey, everybody, thanks for having me here today. As you can see on the slide, I'm Robert Ehrenberg-Andersen, and I am the cybersecurity lead for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Red Hat. I've been in the security space, quickly about my background, for a long time. I was a US Marine Corps cyber operator and warfare specialist for a number of years, as well as the enterprise security architect and head of AppSec and cloud security at AP Moller Maersk, which is one of the world's largest shipping and logistics companies, before coming over here to Red Hat to do security the open source way. So let's talk about Project Telescope a little bit and what this thing is and why it exists. So Project Telescope is a Red Hat supported upstream open source community. And what we're focusing on is creating mechanisms and capabilities for security, governance, and risk automation on top of Kubernetes. So the idea for Telescope, and maybe this is a good place to start, Kenny, is, before I came to Red Hat, when I was working at Maersk, again, massive company, right? So we had like 5,000 people within our technology organization. I think Chris is playing his video below me. So as I was saying, Maersk is a massive organization. We had thousands and thousands of developers, hundreds of dev teams deploying code thousands of times a day. So we had been undergoing at the time one of the largest public cloud transformations and digital transformations in Europe. And that was great. We had, new agile ways of working. We were pumping out tons of code, but problematically for us, our security governance process was super legacy, right? So we had a bunch of like crusty old architects getting into a room together and arguing over potentially non-existent design documentation and, trying to understand what was being produced, which was outpacing our ability to review. And what was happening was we were only really getting our applications through our governance process about 50% of the time, and it was taking about 9 months on average to do it, which is untenable for a large organization, right? Or for any organization. So as the head of cloud security, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do what anyone does, and I'm going to see about my technology partners. I'm going to call Microsoft, I'm going to call Google, and I'm going to, okay, who's got something I can buy to help automate this? And no one had anything, not that I was looking for, right? There were plenty of capabilities to do automation against regulatory compliance, so things like NIST or FIPS or PCI DSS. But what I was looking for was the ability for me, as my own organization, to set a mandate and a definition for minimally viable technical security controls across different domains, right? So how do I ensure that there's secure infrastructure running, and how do I make sure that my code is secure effectively to my standards and my definitions as an organization? And how do I make sure that that's happening in real time, and that where it's not happening, the team is enabled to fix it? So fast forward, now I'm here at Red Hat, and we've stood up Project Telescope to build exactly that, right? So we are actually creating a mechanism to visualize and demonstrate to developer teams, to product owners, to executives within an organization through a single pane of glass dashboard. Is the application that's running in your Kubernetes cluster, in your OpenShift cluster, is it complying to these mandates in real time or not? And where it's not, where are you failing? And to go a step further, we actually decided, hey, taking some of this information, there's certain information we can take from the technical integrations we're building here. There's information we can take from the end user, and we can actually come up with a framework to define financial and operational time amounts of risk inherent in a product or an application set based on its state of compliance, and also based on the vulnerabilities that we're finding through these scans. And we can actually demonstrate in real time, not just the state of compliance, but also how much risk monetarily is sitting in your application at this moment. So that's really what Telescope sets out to be, is to be a comprehensive governance and risk security automation capability for application teams that are building in Kubernetes. So Kenny, maybe that's a good place to pass back over, or
I was talking with the mute button on. Sorry about that. Technology.
Did the same thing earlier.
Yeah, I know. So what I wanted to do, and I think you hit on the slide for the problem space and the solution. And what I wanted to do, if it's okay with Andy, and I don't want to put him on the spot too much, what I would like to do is have Andy talk a little bit about some of the technologies within Telescope, and how we can get started, or how folks can get started and contribute. then I can hit some of the slides that Andy doesn't cover. So what I wanted to do, I'm going to put Andy on the spot here.
Yes, you can. You can put me on the spot.
So what I'm showing right now, Andy, and I would love for you to do an introduction of yourself.
Sure.
And then what I'm showing on the screen now is the telescope dashboard. And within the slide deck, we have the Getting Started with Project Telescope link for people to get involved, try and start it, try and use it, and contribute back. But if you could describe Helm charts and some of the technology, Argo CD, some of the technology that we're using as far as for Project Telescope being deployed.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kenny. So, hey, everyone. My name is Andy Blockman, a Distinguished Architect at Red Hat. I am the Chief Technology Officer for the Project Telescope, working with these fine or crazy set of folks on the call today. I want to talk through some of the technologies that we have decided to leverage as part of Project Telescope. Some of you who have been in the Kubernetes ecosystem or just application development may be familiar with them. So we'll start off with number one. We have several different components that we have in play. We have a front end and a back end, typical distributed architecture. Our front end is based on a Quarkus. So if you're familiar with Spring Boot, it's a lightweight Java application framework, and that allows us to have really fast the back end is a Quarkus-based application, not front end. My apologies. Our front end is a Node.js React-based application to be able to provide more dynamic capabilities, because we see this project expanding out, and we need a way to have these different components be able to be visualized and in dynamic capabilities. If you are thinking about working in a security space, you're going to have a number of different tools in your security toolbox. And the key part about Telescope is it provides a way for you to visualize a lot of the different tools that are inside your security organization. So within your organization, you're going to have a number of different tools out there. It tries to bring it all within a single lens or a single dashboard, and allows you to have multiple lenses based upon different personas inside your organization, because your developer is going to be concerned with one aspect of security. Your CISO is going to be have a totally different aspect. Now, as Robert mentioned earlier, we are deploying this all on Kubernetes, and we focus on Red Hat's distribution of Kubernetes, and that would be Red Hat OpenShift. And to make this deployment possible, we are leveraging two open source communities, or projects and communities at the same time. One is a package manager for Kubernetes called Helm, which allows us to package up all of our disparate components that we have in our ecosystem. We have a front end, a back end component, but we also have some administrative capabilities on top of it that allow us to bring in these tools that are part of our organization. The other, aside from that, is a GitOps tool called Argo CD. GitOps is a mechanism for you to declaratively state your intended state of your infrastructure. So if we want a given state of our deployment within a Kubernetes environment to be maintained and defined, Argo CD is going to run a reconciliation loop to ensure that the state of the current Kubernetes cluster matches your defined configuration. And if you're familiar with Kubernetes, all of your configurations are maintained in a set of YAML formatted files and resources. And this getting started basically takes you from 0 to hero. It kind of assumes that you have you have a basic OpenShift cluster available to you. You can go ahead and there are a number of different ways for you to spin up an OpenShift cluster. Some of them are available for you for free. You can go onto the Dev Sandbox. You probably need a little more access than the Dev Sandbox will provide, at least right now. Our goal is for it to be potentially going onto the Red Hat Dev Sandbox, but as long as you have an OpenShift cluster, you can start leveraging the capabilities within this Getting Started. And this Getting Started is very thorough. It walks you through almost every single step. It makes it easy so that, Robert may not be the most technically adept person, but if you trust me, he's adapted in different ways in different areas of tech, but he was able to run through this on the first try without even thinking about it. How fast?
Took about 6 minutes.
Took him 6 minutes. So it's easy as that, and then you have a full distributed deployment of the Project Telescope lens. And what we've started to do is started to bring in those third-party integrations. So if you want to bring in different tools, that's where we start leveraging communicating to these external systems. So the one system that we're starting with first is Red Hat Advanced Cluster Security. That allows us to provide a better insight of not only the operation of our underlying container platform, OpenShift, but also what we're deploying on OpenShift. So these are going to be your applications that are going to be maintained within container images. Is everyone familiar with the container image? You know, Docker, you may have heard Docker in the past. In the room, what would you say the experience of container images are?
Medium? Yeah.
Medium?
Sure.
Container images are great because one, you can go ahead and package up all the dependencies that your application needs in an atomic unit, because I work with organizations across the globe. And one of the biggest challenges is I need to get a laptop. Okay, I get a laptop. I need to set it up. I need to go ahead and install all my tools, get all the dependencies, and I'm sure it breaks about 18 different times. So not only does it typically take a long time to request access to all the different components, but just installing them is a challenge. A Docker or a container image puts all of that inside a atomic unit that you can then deploy and maintain anywhere. So I can deploy it on my laptop, I can deploy it in the cloud, I can deploy it at the edge.
And Andy, just one thing you touched on that I think others would like to hear a little more on. So when we deploy Project Telescope, since we're using Argo CD or GitOps tool, do I have to redeploy it every time I make a change?
You do not have to redeploy Project Telescope. What you can do is you can update the configuration of your Argo CD manifest, which will in turn trigger the installation of the Helm chart, which will roll out the application as your configuration defines it to be. That's the best part about this is it's all declarative. You no longer have to say, what's really deployed in my environment? I now know it's deployed and then maintained through automation. So what we're showing here on the screen is how you can manage all the integrations that are defined within Project Telescope. So as I mentioned earlier, ACS is Advanced Cluster Security, as I described a second ago. This allows you to define the new integration and perform some configuration for us to be able to then integrate this external tool inside the Project Telescope dashboard. And I guess I want to leave right now saying this is an open source community. We welcome any collaboration that you all have. We want to be able to collaborate with the community because we see security being front and center. There are regulations now that are being driven by the White House and through a number of executive orders. So this tool and this project just doubles down into Red Hat's being, security focused and providing tools for the open source community to start to leverage in their own organizations, in their own communities, and their own projects.
And one thing I want to throw out, and Andy and Robert, please add to this. If you're working on a project, your practicum or dissertation, or in the process of starting that, certainly if your project is around security and looking at how to get that holistic view across an org, improving response to security issues, and you feel like Project Telescope can help, or some pieces of it, please reach out to myself or Andy or Robert. We will be glad to help in any way if Project Telescope or any other Red Hat type open source projects can help you. We would be glad to help. So Robert, Andy, you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just quickly, and thanks for that, Kenny. For what it's worth, guys, those of you, like Kenny said, who are studying, who are looking to focus on security for your thesis or dissertation or any projects you're working on, this is a true open source community. We're looking for a contribution from anyone who's interested, right? So if you think you have either the skill set to contribute or just the interest in learning about DevSecOps and enterprise organizations and how to make that better through automation, and you'd like to take advantage of this, please feel free to get started and to Kenny's point, contact us, and we're more than happy to welcome you into the community and build with you guys. So the other pieces outside of your own studies, if you just have an interest in learning more about security, DevSecOps, the process of security at different organizations, and some technical implementation, stepping over Andy's attacks on my my skill set. I am actually a pretty decent pen tester. So if you have any interest,
I scoped the Kubernetes.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah, and that's fair.
Great. Yeah.
I'm okay. So if you have any interest in learning more about the technical implementations or organizational implementations of security at scale and scope in enterprise, it's another good opportunity to come into Telescope, and you get a lot of hands-on time. Part of what we're doing with this community is also working with our customers, with other engineers and other organizations and Red Hatters. So there's a lot of skill and knowledge and opportunity to leverage to gain more, let's say, practical and real world, less theoretical knowledge as well, if you have an interest in that kind of thing.
And I was gonna, so myself, Andy, Robert, we were able to make the meeting today. Well, I planned on it, but Robert is in Europe, and Andy does a lot of traveling. So glad they were able to make it. And I was gonna play this video from Chris, who is another member. Is everybody, are you able to hear that, Robert? When I play Chris?
No.
No, we can't.
So, yeah, so I doubt I can play that without making an adjustment. But I would enjoy you going and listening to Chris's introduction as well. When you get the slide deck will be available to everybody. But since we're getting close to time, I would love to dive deeper into the architecture, or even more on open source and getting a project started in GitLab or GitHub. But we're going to run out of time. So let's go on to our Q&A. And so, Trey, do you think you could help us and see if there are any questions that myself, Robert, or Andy can answer?
Sure, I can relay questions from anyone in the room.
Well, let's at least take a second to thank the speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kenny, for putting this together, and Robert and Andy for your time speaking. We really appreciate it. Question?
Absolutely. We love to be able to not only showcase some of the cool things we're doing inside Red Hat, but also building up the community knowledge and interest around security.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
I'd be curious to learn more what Red Hat is doing around supply chain security concern.
So I'll repeat the question. The question was, what is Red Hat working on around supply chain security concerns?
Yeah, so I can answer a little bit, and then I'd love to hear Robert and Andy tack on to this. So with supply chain, that's of course one of the things that is in the executive order. And in industry, at least, they're looking at the SBOMs to include with your software. So you can make sure that there are no issues with the software and it's traceable on what it should contain and who's working on it. And so within Red Hat, that means there's two pieces there, right? There's how do we help the community have a better and more secure supply chain, and what we do on a project. But then there's also what do we do with supply chain internally, since we're packaging up software and selling that to customers and the government. All right, so within the executive order, it doesn't specify a lot of timeframes in there, but the rest of the DoD agencies are giving timelines on activities, and SBOMs and secure supply chain is one. So that's a general answer for me, that it is being worked on, and we have some slide decks. We could make another talk. But Andy, Robert, you guys want to jump on that? Do you have something currently to add?
If I can jump in quickly, Andy, because I think you're going to have a much more in-depth answer than I am. If you don't mind me cutting the line a little bit.
Go for it.
Thanks. So just quickly, I want to make a quick point around supply chain security. When we talk about the supply chain, we're not just talking about vulnerabilities introduced through other packages or through vendor-controlled software. We're also talking about support and availability, right? So just to give a quick anecdote, I was working with a customer recently, had a business-critical application in their infrastructure, which was being supported and really stood up by an upstream library, code base that was being supported by one guy out of Kansas. It's no joke, right? And so part of the supply chain consideration is more than just how are we addressing vulnerabilities in the software we package. It's also how are we making sure that the right amount of support is going into some of the critical communities and code bases that organizations are leveraging. So I just wanted to throw that in. There's more than just the vulnerability remediation and patching. There's also the making sure that critical code bases in common use don't come out of support. All right, Andy, go ahead.
So I just want to say that Red Hat has been shipping secure content for years. So a lot of it just comes down to the industry starting to catch up. So a lot of the content that you probably have consumed from Red Hat previously, this is RPM content, that's already been signed. I mean, signing has been a big thing. There's a big project in the open source community called SigStore that makes signing the container images very easy. Well, we've been signing our packages also for many years, and same with our container images. So we're just continuing to allow the entire industry to not only catch up, but we're also working with the industry to help define the next set of technologies to make it available for the masses. And it all starts in the community, and we're working with everyone in the community.
Thank you. Yes, Aaron.
I guess I have two questions. The first would be, are there like particular vulnerabilities associated with containerized applications that you guys are aware of, like that be accounted for differently? And the second is, how do you guys go about dealing with the sort of stigma against open source that various organizations have when you're trying to get accurate?
Okay, repeating the question, it's a two-part question. The first was inquiring about vulnerabilities around containerized what again? Containerized applications, and the second being how are you combating the stigma against open source in the community?
Sorry,
Sorry, I was just going to make one quick comment, and then Robert, please hop on. But with, at least from the Department of Defense, which is where I live a majority of the time, do commercial as well. But with DoD, there's a couple of comments around compliance or security technical implementation guides. So the DoD did release the Kubernetes hardening guide to make Kubernetes container platform more secure. And Red Hat and other vendors do this as well, but working with DISA to create an OpenShift node and platform STIG. So that includes compliance as code. So a way to take this compliance as code and harden a container platform. Now, when you get into the application itself, then that opens up, well, what are you using in your application, and what are you going to have to look out for in regards to security and hardening for the particular application components. But as far as the platform and nodes go, there's a lot of guidance there. And within applications, there are generic guidance, at least from the DoD and Red Hat. And sometimes Red Hat will work with other vendors like SUSE, Canonical, other vendors on general security hardening. And then vendors, of course, need to do their own due diligence. Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. So a couple points, right? I'm going to answer both your questions in turn. So speaking of guidance, there's also, for what it's worth, in this SB 800-190, the application container, what does it stand for? Security guide, I think it's called. It's been a while since I've done US government and used NIST heavily. So there's, like Kenny said, a lot of documentation. However, the meat of your question is, are there any specific vulnerabilities within containerized applications that we're most concerned about? And I want to make a point for your own knowledge about vulnerabilities in CVEs, right? So CVEs by themselves and the correlating CVSS score are not, to me, the main point of focus, right? When you receive, when you run a vulnerability scan in your environment and you get a CVE and you have a CVSS score assigned to it, you're looking at an incomplete picture of the total risk for your organization or for your infrastructure, right? So let's talk about that very briefly. I know we're tight on time here. I always like to say that a CVE is 1/3 of 1/2 of 1/3 of a risk, right? So most organizations quantify the risk by assigning monetary data or financial data around likelihood, threat, and impact, right? And multiplying those together. A threat is made up of a threat actor and a threat vector, and a CVE is a threat vector. And a CVE still needs to have the temporal and environmental scores assigned to it by the software provider, as well as the organization that has the CVE itself. So I just want to say, just the existence of a CVE doesn't mean there's a critical risk, or the existence of a CVE that we've rated as moderate can be a bigger deal than it is. If you've heard of Log4j, Log4j was known for about 4 years before it really crashed the world, and it was pretty much a moderately rated CVE for most of that time, right? Until there were other factors that attackers took advantage of to elevate the damage caused by that specific vulnerability. So I just want to say, the reality is there's no specific CVE we care about more than the individual contextualization of what we find when we find it. And to the second part, how do we deal with the stigma of open source and security? I'd actually challenge the stigma or the existence of the stigma in the first place. I think there's always been kind of multiple schools of thought, but proprietary code isn't any safer than open source code, right? The only difference with proprietary code is it's not publicly shareable or commercial. It doesn't mean it's less vulnerable or that other people aren't attacking it, right? If I'm coming from an attacker's perspective, there's nothing stopping me from going after proprietary code bases, right? If I'm motivated and resourced enough. In fact, I'd argue that from an open source perspective, you're getting the many eyes concept, right? You're getting visibility of the changes made to the code base and of the more potential to actually discover flaws and vulnerabilities as they pop up. So I'd actually argue that in a lot of ways, proprietary code can be less secure or more vulnerable to attack, because hey, if there's a vulnerability in that code, you've got to rely on the owners of that code to find it, right? As opposed to anybody who might be working on a branch of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Well, great. Well, we are out of time for today, but we will be sharing these slides in our INCOSE RAMS team. So we also welcome anyone to join the INCOSE RAMS, right? Any of the students primarily. Certainly you can add faculty and staff if you're interested in the resources or participating in the discussions. So please join that community. Thank you again to our presenters. We really appreciate you
Hey, Trey.
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you there, Trey. If you will, on the slide deck, I'll put it up here real quick. But for anyone that wants to reach out to us, including myself, I can send you the slide deck directly. We don't have our emails on there, but let's go up top here. If you want to reach out to the INCOSE team to get this slide deck sent to you directly, here are our emails. So feel free to send us an email and we'll make sure you get the slides. Just wanted to throw out another option there.
Hey, Kenny, really quickly, sorry, Trey, I know we all have to run. You can also head over to www.project-telescope.com. I put that in the chat. We have an info page, which also has links to our Git and our Getting Started guide and our contact information as well. So I put that in the chat. We have a website. Feel free to head over there and take a look. More details on the project and ways to get involved.
Thanks, Robert. Trey, thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Kenny. And thank you to the department as well. We appreciate Deb and Kevin supporting us in advertising this event and helping set it up. And we're grateful for that, and we look forward to the next one. So thanks for participating today.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.